It started like any other evening. The air still heavy with summer heat as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops when a hard knock rattled my front door, sharp and insistent, the kind of knock meant to intimidate. And when I opened it, two men stood on the porch wearing cheap black uniforms with shiny tin badges clipped to their belts, their chests puffed out as if they were the law itself, their hands resting near their hips where plastic holsters sat awkwardly. But even at a glance, something felt off. Their patches didn't match. Their belts looked more like costume shop knockoffs. And the smug way one of them leaned in and barked, "Sir, you're in violation of HOA bylaws, and we're here to enforce compliance," told me instantly that they weren't real police, but hired actors, thugs dressed up to scare me. Another one of Karen's dirty tricks to bully me into submission. And while most folks might have frozen, heart racing at the thought of being confronted by authority, I couldn't help but smile, because standing just behind me in the hallway was my wife, a woman who had spent her career serving as a deputy U.S. Marshal, who knew the difference between a fake badge and the real deal better than anyone alive. And the second she stepped into view, her posture crisp and commanding, her eyes locked on their sloppy uniforms, I saw the blood drain from their faces. And when she calmly asked, "Which department are you with, and what's your commanding officer's name?" the silence that followed was deafening, the cheap confidence melting from their smirks as she reached into her bag, flipped open her leather credentials case, and the golden U.S. Marshal badge gleamed in the porch light, a beam of authority so real and so undeniable that the so-called enforcers stumbled back like they'd been slapped, stammering excuses about miscommunication and just doing their job. But my wife wasn't done. Her voice cut through the humid air like a blade as she informed them impersonating law enforcement was a federal crime, her tone deadly serious. And in that moment, their act collapsed completely, their bravado gone. And without another word, they bolted off my porch, sprinting clumsily down the sidewalk toward a car idling at the curb, peeling away so fast they nearly took out a trash can, leaving behind only the echo of their failed intimidation attempt. And as the neighbors peeked from behind their curtains whispering about what they'd just witnessed, I knew one thing for sure. Karen had overplayed her hand this time, because sending fakes dressed as cops wasn't just harassment. It was a crime that would put her in deeper trouble than she ever imagined. And she had no idea yet that her little stunt had just backfired in the worst way possible.
By the next morning, the story had already spread like wildfire. Because in a neighborhood where Karen ruled by fear and intimidation, the sight of two supposed officers sprinting off my porch while my wife calmly held her U.S. Marshal badge had become the kind of tale that traveled fast, whispered from one mailbox to the next. And though most neighbors pretended to stay neutral, I could feel the tide shifting. People who had once looked away when Karen flexed her power were now sneaking glances at me with something new in their eyes, a flicker of respect, maybe even hope. But Karen, true to form, didn't back down. She doubled down, stomping up and down the street with her board members, insisting to anyone who would listen that I had broken the law, that the officers who came to my door were legitimate, that my wife had overstepped by pretending to be an agent, a claim so outrageous it bordered on insane. Yet she shouted it with such wild conviction that a few of the more timid neighbors nodded just to avoid her wrath. But what Karen didn't know was that my wife had already placed a call to her old contacts in the Marshal's office. And by that afternoon, a real, unmarked government vehicle rolled quietly into the neighborhood. Two actual agents stepping out in plain clothes, their presence calm but commanding, the kind of authority you can't fake. And they sat with us at the kitchen table, reviewing the entire incident. Watching the footage I had recorded of the imposters fumbling on my porch, taking notes with professional precision, and when one of them leaned back and said, "These men aren't just frauds. They've committed federal impersonation. That's prison time," I felt a surge of satisfaction. because Karen's game had escalated far beyond HOA nonsense now. It had crossed into federal territory. And while she strutted around outside barking about community rules, the real law was moving quietly against her. And as the agents assured us they'd be opening a full investigation, I knew Karen had no idea that her little stunt, meant to scare us, had just invited the kind of scrutiny that would strip away her illusion of power once and for all, leaving her exposed and cornered with nowhere to run.
2 days later, the hammer finally dropped. Because while Karen strutted around the neighborhood acting like nothing had happened, boasting that the board is handling the matter internally, she had no clue that the real authorities were already circling, and it all came to a head one humid afternoon when 2 unmarked government SUVs rolled onto the cul-de-sac, stopping right in front of her pristine driveway, and before long, actual law enforcement agents stepped out, their badges real, their presence commanding in a way that silenced the street instantly. Neighbors peeking from behind curtains, some even stepping out onto porches, holding their breath as Karen marched out of her garage in a blazer and oversized sunglasses, trying to look composed but betraying herself with the twitch of her jaw. And the agents wasted no time, calmly informing her that they had received reports and video evidence of individuals impersonating law enforcement at her direction, that such crimes carried serious consequences. And as they read her the statute word for word, her confidence cracked, her smile faltered, and she snapped back in her shrill voice that those men were volunteers just helping the community. A defense so pathetic that even the neighbors watching from across the street couldn't hold back murmurs of disbelief. And when the agents told her plainly that impersonating federal officers was a felony and that she was now officially under investigation, her facade shattered completely, her voice rising to a screech as she accused me, accused my wife, accused the entire neighborhood of conspiring against her. And though she waved her binder of papers like a shield, the agents didn't flinch, didn't so much as raise their tone. They simply wrote down her every word, their calm professionalism highlighting just how unhinged she had become. And when one of them finally looked her dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, if you continue obstructing, you'll be taken into custody today," the color drained from her face. The crowd of neighbors gasped, and for the first time since moving in, I saw Karen retreat. Not storming, not stomping, but physically shrinking back into her house, slamming the door shut as if she could hide from the reality that had finally caught up with her, leaving the entire street buzzing with the undeniable truth. The queen of the HOA had been knocked off her throne, and the law, not her, was now in control. In the days that followed, Karen's empire crumbled faster than anyone expected, because once the real investigation began, the HOA board she had bullied into silence for years started scattering like leaves in the wind, resignations arriving one after another as nobody wanted to be tied to her disastrous stunt. And the same neighbors who used to fear her clipboard and constant threats now openly laughed at her, whispering about the day federal agents parked in her driveway, replaying the footage I had shared of those fake cops sprinting away in disgrace, their cheap badges glinting like toys. And while Karen tried to hold on to whatever dignity she had left, slamming her blinds shut, stumping down to her mailbox in the early morning to avoid stares, the truth was she had lost everything: her reputation, her influence, her board, and worst of all for her, the iron grip she once held over the community. Because when people saw her binder now, they didn't bow their heads or scramble to comply, they rolled their eyes, knowing her power had been nothing but smoke and mirrors. And the final blow came one bright morning when a county notice was taped to her front door announcing that her HOA was officially under review for misconduct and fraud, the very system she had weaponized against others now turning on her. And I stood on my porch, sipping coffee beside my wife, who smiled calmly as she watched Karen yank the paper down, crumple it in her hands, and hurl it to the ground in a fit of impotent rage. because no badge, no clipboard, no tantrum could undo the fact that the law was against her now. And as neighbors waved to me, some even stopping by to thank my wife for exposing the truth, I realized Karen's reign was truly over. Her threats reduced to empty noise, and the community, once shackled by fear, was finally free. Not because someone stronger had come along, but because someone had finally stood up and refused to bend. And Karen had learned in the most humiliating way possible that fake power collapses the second it collides with the real thing.